Hi, I'm glad you're here for part 2 of what to do inside of your cards. As I mentioned in my last video, it's a question I get asked about a lot, and I am sharing many more ideas for simple things you can do in your cards to give them a complete look. If you didn't see my part 1 video, I encourage you to check it out. You can find it here in the top right corner, at the end of this video, or in my description below. The cards that I create in this video are very different than the ones I created in the last video. Today is all about die cutting and using up some scraps. So some fun ideas for you, and then we'll also talk about the inside of cards. Let's get started with this card simply because I use the leftover pieces, the scraps from this card, on all of my other cards. This one was super fast to put together and gives a really cool look. It uses 2 different dies from Altenew. You can use these together or separately, and they are sold separately. The garden trellis background die, which is on the right, is one that I've used before in videos. It's been out for some time. On the left is a new stripes die. That's really cool because you can use it either vertical or horizontally on a card front. But what's really cool is if you do 2 of the stripe die cuts and create a plaid, or if you use these 2 dies together, you can create a really fun effect that is a fun throwback to my childhood. Off screen, I did a bunch of die cutting of both of these backgrounds, more than I need for today's video, but I plan to make more of these cards off screen. Now I've chosen 3 backgrounds, 2 of the stripe and 1 of the trellis, and I am gluing these together. I found the easiest way to do so was to spray the back of each die cut with a spray adhesive. I just take that outside, spray it in a box, come back in my craft room, and put them together. You just want to put something heavy on it and give it a few moments to dry, and it'll hold well. Another option would be to put double-sided adhesive on the back of your cardstock before you die cut, basically making a die cut sticker. Then it would be easy to assemble also. So I did the 2 stripe backgrounds to create a plaid, and now I'm putting this trellis one on top. And look at that, so much fun. This is a throwback for me because when I was growing up, the chairs in my mom's kitchen looked just like this in brown. Totally like this. It's a familiar look, and it was easy to create. I was able to use some scraps of cardstock to create these backgrounds, and I can make a bunch more off screen, and you see how fast they are. I have mentioned in videos that I try to focus on products that have multiple uses, and this definitely fits the bill. Okay, so now I'm gluing that onto a 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inch note card. Again, I use the spray adhesive, and always put something heavy on it while it dries. Once it's dry, you can trim the excess off and you have a fun background, and all you need to do is add a sentiment. If you want to, you could add a floral image or add other focal point images, but I felt like this background was fun enough as is. Now here's one that I did with 3 shades of light craft cardstock on white. That definitely looks like those chairs. And I thought this would be beautiful with a floral image on it. I didn't get to that today, but I'm definitely saving it for the future. To finish off the blue and green card, I used a sentiment from the Altenew Versatile Greetings die set. There is a die set and a foil set that coordinate but are sold separately. I used that a lot in previous videos, and I'll use it several times today. I also later will use the Altenew Sweet Sentiment die set, which is on the right. That has a die set and, again, a foil plate set that coordinates and is sold separately. I'm just using the dies from both of these sets today. On this card, I'm also using the Altenew Sentiment Strips stamp set. This is one you can tell I have used many times over the years. And I white heat embossed a sentiment on black cardstock and put it underneath our thanks die cut. Now the inside of this card is super simple, but it really pulls it together nicely. I just took 2 thin green cardstock strips that were left over from all of the die cutting I did with that stripes die, and I glued them as a border on the inside. It takes just a few moments, and I use scraps, but it really kind of completes the look. You could definitely do more of this kind of pattern on the inside if you wanted to, but I like to keep the inside simple so the focus is on the sentiment that you write, but you can add more if you want. So think about what scraps you may have from creating the front of your card that you can use on the inside. I'll show another example of that later in this video. I have a lot of little squares left over from cutting a bunch of those trellis backgrounds and little stripes of cardstock left over from the stripes die. I did this inlay one using some of the leftover little squares. Then this one here, I did an inlay on the trellis and then I put the stripes on top of it. So use those scraps and you can create more and more backgrounds. I did not complete these cards for today, but I have lots ready to go for the next time I want to craft. This is also something really good to do when you lose your crafty mojo. You just do a bunch of die cutting for backgrounds, so you have these ready to go the next time you're feeling creative. Now I still have lots of scraps left over, lots of colorful scraps. We have little squares left over from the trellis background die. And we have lots of little strips left over from that stripe background die. The stripe background die actually creates two sizes of strips that are left over. You can see them in there. One's wider, one's thinner. I didn't want those to go to waste. Now the thicker ones I can save to use as sentiment strips on cards or to build up dimension behind sentiment strips. But I thought I would use these today to create a fun striped background on the bottom of several cards. So all of these will be going to use. I created a bunch of cards with this kind of overall card design, but I changed up little things to keep it interesting, and I also changed up what I do on the inside of the cards. I thought I'd walk you through these. So you can see there on the bottom of the card that I used those leftover strips from the background die on these cards. But first I wanted to add a little bit of interest to the note card. So I'm using the older Altenew Dotted Swirls Debossing die. This is one of my most used debossing dies. I am temporarily taping it to the front of a note card. I will run it through my die cut machine as I normally would with the card open. Once it's gone through, it will end up with this pierced pattern on the front of the card, which I think is a great way to add a little interest to any white space on your card. Now I have a bunch of these cardstock strips that I'll glue along the bottom. And I'm doing this at a diagonal just for a fun design element, I guess. Now for most of these cards, I'm using some of the lighter colors, so it's a little more muted because it's just a backdrop to the planter that I'm going to add in a moment. So I'm using white and light gray cardstock, and I have a few strips of silver metallic cardstock that I've left over too. I do have a lot of colorful strips of cardstock left over from earlier, so I plan to do like a colorful background that's all stripes and then maybe stamp some sentiments on some, but I'll save that for another video. All right, so here I just started with one large strip going kind of at an angle there towards the middle bottom of our card, and then I will build up the rest around it. This is an excellent way to use up those scraps that you might get when you cut off the edge of a piece of cardstock or use a die like this. All right, once I have covered the entire bottom corner with strips, I will just let it dry for a moment and then flip it over and trim everything off. Now that we have the background for our card ready, let's create the focal point. I really like this new Altenew Boho Vases die set. It has a different look than a lot of the things that I have. You can use the leaves separately for something else, or you can take maybe some floral dies that you have and use them with the vases. So a lot of different ways you can use these. I just like the unique look of these. I thought it could be used for a lot of occasions, so I made a bunch of cards. Off screen, I did a bunch of die cutting from some colorful scraps I found in my scraps drawer. I die cut multiples of each die and glued them together for a nice stacked look. And I have all of these vases ready to go. You could put 3 vases on one card, but I decided to do 1 vase on each of my cards today, so I have lots of leftovers to make more cards. So I chose one here that I created out of navy cardstock, and now it's time to fill my planter. I, off screen, did a bunch of die cutting of the leaves from various colors of green, lots of different shades. I have even more I'm not showing here. I did glue 2 of each die cut together for a bit of dimension because I like that dimension, but you could skip if you want. By cutting a bunch of different colors of green, I can mix and match them on my cards quickly, so we don't have all the leaves in the same color. I did die cut more leaves than I need, but I thought these would be great as fillers behind various floral die cuts that I often use on my cards. So these will come in handy to have in my drawer of extras and ready to go. I kept this card design pretty simple. It didn't take very long to do because I had everything pre-cut and I had those leftover scraps for along the bottom. Now, if you wanted to kind of step this up, you could do a little ink blending to add the look of depth on the leaves or on the planter itself, but I decided to keep it simple. When assembling little arrangements like this one, I like to use liquid adhesive so that I can wiggle things around till I get the placement just right. Then I'll put something heavy on it while it dries and I can be sure it will hold nicely. This is Gina K Connect liquid adhesive in a fine tip bottle. For the inside of this card, I wanted to mimic the design of the outside a little bit. So I am putting 3 strips of cardstock at the same angle as I have on the front, as close as I could get. I'm only doing 3 to kind of keep it simple because again, that's what I prefer, but you could do more if you want. I also want to leave plenty of room to write my personal greeting. So I'm using, again, some of those leftover scraps. Then I will stamp a greeting up towards the top center. So the idea here is to mimic the design of the front, but also add an additional sentiment. On the front of this card, I did a simple thanks, so it was nice to put more on the inside. This is the Altenew Happy Flowers stamp set. It has a lot of great greetings. I chose a thank you one that works really well on the inside of cards, and I will use some of the simpler sentiments later in this video also. While we're here, I'll just show you what these flowers look like. I think it's helpful when you see a stamp set. Look at those beautiful layering flowers. This is a very simple layering stamp set, and I'll definitely use it in a future video. But for now, I'm just using a thank you sentiment for the inside of my card. I'm trying to figure out what position I like best for the sentiment. I decided to go with the top center, but I also think this would look nice kind of at an angle at the bottom near those cardstock strips. I think both would work. But another way to really tie the front of your card into the inside of the card is to use the same colors. So instead of stamping this with black ink, I'm stamping it with a navy ink that matches the navy planter I have on the front. So think of ways you can pull the design of the front and the colors of the front to the inside of the card in a very simple way. Now that thanks die cut on the front is from the Sweet Sentiments die set I showed you earlier. I cut the shadow from white and the word thanks from navy and glued that together. I did add additional white die cuts behind the word thanks so it's nice and strong since it's sitting up over the dimension of the planter. I did use a few little foam squares cut up behind the word thanks so that it would sit up nice and tall. If you want to have less bulk on your card, you could definitely just do 1 layer of all of these die cuts and the results would still be nice. Okay, here's our next card, very similar to the last one, but this time I changed up the sentiment on the front and also what I did on the inside. This one is super simple, but a great way just to add a little something on the inside. So here I have one of the wider strips that was left over from that Altenew Stripes background die. I'm temporarily taping it into my stamping tool and lining up a sentiment on it. Sorry, my head gets in the way. As I mentioned, scraps like this are great for creating sentiment strips. In this case, I'm stamping the sentiment with black ink, and then I will glue this on the inside of the card at a little bit of an angle. Super simple, but again, it just adds something fun to the inside. And a great way to use up your scraps. Also a great way to use up sentiments you may not have used a lot in the past. Now for the front of the card, I did use the Altenew Tiny Sentiments Hello stamp set. I've used this one many times. I like the small greetings on here. I feel it works really well on sentiment strips. So here's a closer look. I used the Hello die cuts from the Altenew Versatile Greeting die set. And I used that tiny Altenew stamp set on the front and the happy flowers on the inside. So I combined sentiments from 2 different stamp sets to get more from them. I liked this card design so much that I made multiple cards with this design, but I changed things up on each. I changed up the colors, I changed up the sentiments. You could even leave the sentiments off and then add them when you have a particular occasion, such as thanks, birthday, or whatever. Here's another with a very similar design, but I changed up the vase I used. I used silver cardstock. I used some bluish green leaves, And again, I have a sentiment strip on the inside. By the way, I'm using these planter images a lot on these cards because I really like them. I think they're unique. But you could do this overall card design, but change up what you put there instead of the planter. You could do some flowers, you could do a little critter, you could do a feather, anything you want. My next example is a little more colorful. This uses some of the colorful strips that I had left over from that stripes background die. And I put them together on the front of this card just like I did the last ones. However, this time I used a colored note card, which I like to do a lot. However, whenever I use a colored note card, I usually will put white cardstock inserts on the inside, so I have a nice place to write with a normal pen. If you want to use colorful cardstock for your note card, you could always use like a white gel pen, but I prefer just to use a regular pen. So I add white cardstock to the inside. Now in this case, I also put white cardstock on the other part of the inside because the cardstock that I chose here was a lighter weight cardstock, and I wanted my card to be strong. So I will oftentimes put a piece of white cardstock up there on the top inside and the bottom inside to give it strength, to give it a complete look, and to give me a nice place to write my personal sentiment. So if you do colorful note cards, a white insert is always a nice touch. For my next few cards, I'm using the same Boho Vases die set, but I thought I'd add some little flowers to it for a little pop of color. So I grabbed this older Altenew Sweet Blooms die set. It's great for forming a wreath, or if you wanted to, you see the foliage in this one, you could have that with the planter. So these little planters or vases work really well with other leaves and flowers you may have. Well, I probably will make some of these with these planters in the future, but for now I'm using a small die that's included in the set, this one here, that creates tiny flowers. That way I can quickly cut a bunch of flowers from scraps of cardstock to match the backgrounds on my cards and add them to the leaves that I have in my vases. So you can see those little flowers are on the leaves of this card. And for the inside of this card, I use some of the leftover leaf die cuts along the bottom edge of the card. You could have them coming off the top or the side, but I really think the bottom is nice, so you have plenty of room to write above it. So that's another idea for the inside of your cards, is to use some of the leftover die cuts to mimic the front. Now here you can see those little flower die cuts with little gems at the center. And for those angled pieces on the bottom, I used all light gray strips, but I stacked every other one so it had that fun dimension to it. Little changes like this when you're making multiple cards keeps it interesting. And again, we have the leaf die cuts on the inside to match the outside. This next example kind of combines some of the various inside card ideas that I have. We have the strip that is at an angle to mimic the front. We have the added sentiment and a leftover leaf die cut. Something simple like this doesn't take time, but it's something that we just got to remember to do when we make a card. And I'll try to do that in future videos. On this next example, I did a simple sentiment stamped on the outside. So on the inside, I used a die cut sentiment. I just cut the word thanks once from a plum colored cardstock, which matches the outside, and glued it right to the top center, leaving plenty of room to write the message below. You can also see I used the little flowers again, which is a nice way to change up the look of these planter images. Now this purple card I made for my friend who loves purple, and so I thought it'd be fun to do a splash of purple on the inside, so I just cut a purple cardstock piece to be slightly smaller than our note card, put that in there, and now I can just write my personal message on it. You could stamp on it, decorate it if you want. I do recommend sticking to a lighter color unless you want to use a white gel pen for your message. Okay, let's change things up and do a little stamping. And this is a trick that works anytime you use a background stamp. You can easily stamp the same stamp on the front and inside of the card. So I have this Altenew linear spiral background stamp. Any background stamp that would work for this. I do recommend using a lighter color ink. So I have my MISTI stamping tool and a sticky mat inside. I recommend sticky mats because they're really handy for stenciling and using a stamping tool, but you could also use temporary tape. I'm placing a note card that's 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inches onto the sticky mat, and I'll open the note card up. I'm lining up my stamp so it stamps just on that inside area of the card. Then I will close the door on my stamping tool to grab the stamp. And now we can stamp this on the inside and front of our card. It'll be positioned in just the right spot. So after I stamp the inside, I close the note card and stamp the outside. Now I am using a very light ink here because I want to be able to write a personal message over that stamping that's on the inside. I did stamp it twice, which I normally wouldn't do, just so you could see it better in a video. But when I normally do this, I usually only stamp it once with a light ink, so it's very subtle. This is a great way to really quickly stamp the inside and outside of your card. Now the card design for this is very simple. Again, I'm using the Boho vases. This time I filled it full and used the large vase, and I added little flowers. The sentiment is from the Versatile Greeting die set. Now for the inside, I did stamp a sentiment from the sentiment strip stamp set right along the bottom, and there you can see our matching stamping. Plenty of room for our personal greeting, and because I stamped with a light ink, I can do it right on top of the stamping. For my next card, I changed things up a little bit, and I am sharing an idea for the inside of the card that is one I need to do more often because I really like it. Here I have a note card where I used the debossing die on the inside. The same one that I used earlier on the front, I used on the inside of my note card. I then cut a couple of the Altenew nesting label dies, and I used the largest die, and I'm gluing that to the inside right on top of that dot pattern. So this will give me a smooth place to write my sentiment, and the frame on the inside will match the frame on the outside. So for the front of the card, I used the debossing dotted die on the white die cut. So it's opposite of what's on the inside. I will now glue that right to the front center of our card, and the inside and outside match. I also like that added texture on the inside. To finish off the card, I added another of the Boho vase arrangements at the center, used gold cardstock for a bit of fun, and the Sweet Sentiments Thanks die cut. I think you can tell I like that one. So here we have a large die cut on the front and the inside. So this is a reminder to use large dies to create a spot to write your sentiment on the inside. You could use circles, rectangles, maybe rectangles with faux stitching, or something ornate like this one. It's also a reminder you can use your debossing dies that create those pierced patterns on the inside of your card, just as long as you come up with a little space to write your personal message that is smooth, such as this die cut. Enough of those vases for now. I still plan to make more off screen, but while I was die cutting all of those vases, I also die cut a bunch of these ornamental die cuts so that I could create some pattern cards. I love doing these type of cards. This is the Altenew Decorative Enamel die set. There are 2 different shapes. You could use them together or separate. I made 2 different cards using them separately. Again, I went through my scraps and did a bunch of die cutting, and now I want to assemble them in a pattern on my card. To do the pattern, it's helpful to find the center point of my card. So I have this little template that I created in another video. I will link to that video up here on the top right and at the end of this video if you want to check it out. But basically, I cut a piece of cardstock the same size as my note card, 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inches, and I folded halfway in each direction and poked a little hole at the center. That is the center point of my card. So I made little pencil marks there so I could use that to get my pattern started. I'll take my first die cut and glue that right over the dot. So there's a hole at the center of this die cut. I just make sure the dot is in that hole. So you could do a variety of things to find that center point, but this is something quick and easy you can do to create your own template and have on hand anytime you need that center point. So I'll just fill in the space around it using the die cuts. I really didn't need like pencil lines to keep this going. Once I got that one in the center, I can fill in around it easily. Once all the die cuts have dried, I can flip the card over and cut off the excess, saving those pieces to put on the edge of another card that I plan to make in a moment. I finished off this card by adding a friend die cut in the center from the Versatile Greetings die set. And then in the inside, I kept it very simple. I did a simple stamped sentiment at the top center, leaving plenty of room for message below. And on the front, I also added some gemstones to the patterns of the die cuts for a little bit of shine. I enjoy putting die cut cards together like this, but you could definitely do this same design with stamping if you prefer. Here is a second card that I created that's very similar, but this time I used a thanks die cut sentiment on the front. And on the inside, I ended up really liking this and may go back and change the other one. I put an extra die cut on the top center on the inside and put a sentiment strip over it. It's a black cardstock sentiment strip with a white heat embossed greeting that goes nicely with the sentiment on the front. So this is another way to decorate the inside of your card using an additional sentiment and leftover die cuts. By the way, for a little fun, I have my gemstones kind of hanging off the edge of the card in some spots. So I chose an A6 envelope, which is slightly bigger than an A2 envelope. I will link to my source for that below. And that way you can have elements hanging off your card and it'll still fit in an envelope. Now the best part of this is I still have all of these die cuts left over. I die cut them all off screen, glued them together all off screen, and now I can make a bunch more cards. But remember, if you prefer stamping or stenciling over die cutting, you could definitely do these card designs with those other products. And check out my part 1 video where I did a lot of stenciling and stamping instead. All right, if you're interested in the supplies that I use, I've linked them below in my YouTube description. You can also go to my blog for a lot more information and photos of all of these cards. And remember to try decorating inside of your cards. It's really a fun way to step things up and use some extras. I'll see you again soon with another video.